Drama musicals always have only one protagonist. I'm not good enough to write for two protagonists. And the one protagonist has to overcome rising opposition, well, which is something most of the stories do. But not always, the opposition rises. And the antagonist, of course, who creates most of that opposition, he has to be very powerful and very threatening, because that makes the protagonist bigger. And what is important in that sense is that I regard the story as a means for the protagonist to overcome some kind of fault, some kind of need in his character or in his relation to others. So, to make that clear, if a character is arrogant, like Marguerite in Marie Antoinette, or Marie Antoinette for that, I think the whole story has to happen to her to overcome that, to become a better person. This is not because I want to teach or preach the audience what the right way of living is, but to make the story, to give the story some real meaning, some meaning that goes beyond reaching a goal. Actually, I believe the protagonist should only reach his goal by overcoming his need. So, actually, I see that the story is not the most important thing. The story doesn't happen just by chance. It happens to this protagonist to teach him something. And I found that a very useful approach to getting a story in shape. And most of my stories come from history, real life. But of course I use, all the elements which I find and put them together and so I can decide between important scenes and unimportant scenes. So, if the and if the protagonist starts out with a need, and somewhere here, which is, of course, inciting incident, where something happens to him, that makes him want something. He obsessively tries to reach that goal. I always have the picture of the guy falls into a pit and he wants to get out again. But he cannot get out until he comes in a situation which makes him a new person. So the idea of death and resurrection is very intense in most of my musicals. And sometimes it's almost real death, or it's death on Elizabeth is a good example. I used the burial of Rudolph for that moment where the old Elizabeth dies and a new Elizabeth is born. It is not her own burial, but almost. It's her only son. And this is the moment of self-revelation. this is the moment where, again, in a song, the protagonist understands what was wrong with him. And from that moment on, he can reach the goal, which is, in the case of Elizabeth, her fulfillment of her love to death, actually. I also think, and this is a minor thing, I mentioned that I use a lot of historic stories, but I do feel that it's the theme of the show has to be understood by a contemporary audience. So Elizabeth is about women's slip, if you want to put it that way. But even, on a deeper sense, it's about finding your true self, which is something a modern audience really is interested in. Or Mozart, the show I wrote about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, it is about the duty of a very gifted artist to make the most out of his talent and not to be manipulated by other people or by money, by success, things like that. And finally, and here I come to Lehmann Engel again, the subplots of the shows, they always should be a variation of the theme. I invent or look for subplots that discuss my theme. In other words, again, I use Elizabeth as example. Every subplot in Elizabeth is about freedom, personal freedom. Some of these sub-characters, they give up freedom for a higher purpose. Some look for freedom in drugs, like Rudolf. But it's always about freedom. It's always about, the whole show is about freedom. Every character, and sometimes when we are in rehearsals, I talk to the cast and say, try to find out what kind of relationship your character has to the word freedom and how he tries to solve his urge for freedom. And this, for example, in Marie Antoinette, it's about arrogance. It's about arrogance. And every character has some kind of arrogance, and the subplots are all about arrogance. And that keeps the show together. That makes it a unit. It doesn't fall apart if you have a theme that combines everything.